No, you don't need. You don't need the.
I'm doing this my way.
He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend.
Talking on it though, then
He
you
a
can't work
legend.
it up later.
Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of items.
Pike on money, pike on money, pike on money.
What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and in today's video, we are going to talk about the LCK and the LEC. We're going to start with the LCK, and then we will discuss the LEC. The reason is because the LCS and the LPL are not playing right now. They will be back shortly. No major takeaways from most of the matches in the LCK. A lot of the matches were between teams that were relatively close, or it played out the way that we assumed based on ranking. So we'll just go game by game or match by match. Damwon against DRX. Damwon handled them pretty easily. T1 against Gen.G. T1 is much better than Gen.G. Gen.G is the type of team that we might need to downgrade slightly into an A tier team. I'm keeping an eye on that one. I think there might be some real downside, especially with other things that we've seen so far. Hanwha Life against Kwangdong, not surprising there. Nongshim and Fredit Brion, two lower tier teams, not going to change anything based off of that. T1 against KT. KT took one of the games but lost the match. Damwon against Sandbox. So that was the first time we saw Sandbox, and that was a tough test for Sandbox. They were swept by Damwon. And didn't really put up much of a fight. Gen.G against DRX, that's how we expect it to go. Fredit Brion against Kwangdong, again, not going to put too much stock in those types of lower level matchups. Then we had Sandbox with the biggest upset so far in the LCK against Hanwha Life. We're going to take a look at that closer. And then Nongshim against KT. KT did pretty well against Nongshim there. But let's take a look at the scoreboards for the Hanwha Life and Sandbox match. And the reason is because I've been talking about Sandbox a decent amount before this season started. And this is a huge victory for this type of team because it shows their upside. I didn't really expect them to be... I didn't expect them to win this early on. But that just means, maybe the upside's even closer than I thought. Maybe the path to upside is closer or shorter than I thought. Sorry. So game one, we had Hanwha Life against Sandbox, Kingen against Bertol, K'Sante against Jax. We see that all over the place. It's interesting. I think that for the most part, teams that allow K'Sante to go to red side are just saying they don't think that the other top laner is very good. I don't know. I wouldn't want to be giving away K'Sante. I know that the Jax K'Sante is a very popular trade. We saw Fiora a couple of times because there is a decent amount of K'Sante's abilities that are telegraphed, so you can riposte pretty easily, but we haven't seen it have a big impact so far. Then we had Closer against Zeke in the mid lane, Akali against Azir, and this is the kind of spot where it's not surprising at all that Closer is able to not only pick a champion like Akali. Anybody can pick the champion. It's about playing the champion effectively. Closer is this style of mid laner. Hanwha Life going into this matchup had to know that Closer's champion pool included something like this, so they must have been fine with the Azir Akali matchup, which is I think something that we saw at the World Finals as well. Zika, very good player, not trying to take anything away from him. Then we had Envy and Kale, and this was actually a very close game. There was a big Baron fight at the end of the game that decided this one, and Envy played it pretty well. A lot of people were critical of him after their game against Damwon. Game two, kind of more of what you expected. We had Kingen against Bertol, K'Sante against Fiora again, Vi, Sejuani. The jungle pool is not really exciting for most teams right now. These are not the types of champions that I want to see Willer on. I want him to be more aggressive on more of like a carry style champion, but maybe that isn't going to be his role within this team. And if he's able to play this style as well, then if we get into a true carry meta, then he can do both, which would be nice. It is possible to play those style of champions. We've seen it in other regions, especially in the LEC. We'll talk about that more specifically. Sylas against Akali, Zika on Sylas, which is one of his best champions. One of the champions that he played very well at Worlds. Then we had Zeri Lulu against Viper Heimerdinger. This is another thing that I don't really understand. I'm pretty surprised at the amount of double ranged supports we're having throughout the world, and there aren't many teams picking ways to attack it. It seems like everybody's kind of okay just handshaking it and saying you're going to have two ranged champions in the bot lane. We're going to have two in the bot lane as well, and we'll see you guys around like the Rift Herald fights, Dragon fights, and just go for picks. It seems like a weird thing to kind of agree to. If you know that it's likely the enemy team is going to do something like that, there are ways to attack it. I'm surprised. I think that we'll see more of that as time goes on. Teams will get more aggressive. Then in the last game, this was a good match as well. Gnar against Renekton. So the K'Sante was finally taken away. Birdall had a good match overall. He had a good game in game 3. They did a lot of... What I would say about Sandbox is they looked like they were communicating very well, and they were attacking. They were looking for pick opportunities throughout the map, get that one-man advantage, and then turn that into an objective. And they did it consistently. They were continuously looking for angles to close out the game. That's kind of what you need to see from this team. I'm not super surprised that they were... I'm not surprised that they won. I'm surprised with how they won. I figured if it was like really snowbally early game, these players are good enough to do that in the early game. But what we saw was more of like a slower paced game where they were able to go toe to toe with a team like Hanwha, who I think is one of the top 10 teams in the world right now, which says a lot about Sandbox's upside, like I've said before. Zika going back onto Azir against Sylas. Closer plays all the Zika champions. I've been saying this. Closer is a very similar player to Zika. I don't think that he's as good as Zika, but again, the Faker narrative comes back where Closer is thought of as somebody who was supposed to take over for Faker. Faker stuck around, so he went elsewhere. Same thing with Zika. Zika ended up winning a world championship. Could Closer win a world championship? That'd be really cool. That'd be a very interesting connection between those players forever if they were able to accomplish something like that. And then Envy and Kale, again, going up against Viper Life. Viper, very good player. Life, not a very good player. That's basically it. So Sandbox, I'm taking the early season victory lap on that one. Very excited with their accomplishments so far. So in terms of a tier list, I'll just read through it the way that I had it before. I haven't made many adjustments. I'm going to do that probably in the beginning of February, but I'm starting to take notes on teams that I might have to move around. So still, I think that the teams that are in the D tier, which are below average teams that won't be super competitive, and they won't factor in much into the spring season, don't have really great future prospects. I think that Fred and Brion, they have 2 wins against lower tier teams. I don't have much faith in them to pull something off against better teams. That's just the honest truth. I'm not going to lie about that. So I still have Nongshim, Kwangdong Freaks, and Fred and Brion in the D tier. In the B tier, which are the teams that I expect to be competitive with the upper echelon teams, we have DRX, KT, and Sandbox. I think that I want to increase Sandbox into the A tier. That seems likely to me because, again, this isn't just about what have the results been. It's what are the results, what are the players showing us on the map, on the Rift, and what does the future look like for them? Like, what are they going to be able to accomplish at their peak? I think that Sandbox has a peak that other teams just don't. I know that a lot of people are very interested in a team like KT Rolster. KT Rolster, good familiar names, so people want to support a team like that because we have good feelings about a lot of these players. I think Sandbox is just going to end up being more talented than them. If you built the best roster out of both of these teams combined, would it have more players from Sandbox or KT Rolster? I'm not sure. Based on history, you would probably take 3 players from KT Rolster, but based on future upside, I think it's going to be probably 3 players from Sandbox. But we'll see how that plays out. I could be wrong about that, but I have a lot of faith in this roster. I think Birdall, Willer, Closer, all three very good players. Envy, if he can stay influential in the late game, even though his early games are going to be, kind of shaky just because he's the question mark on the team. That'll determine how far this team can really go. So that's for the LCK, B and A tier. And then for the S tier, I think that I'm probably going to have to downgrade Gen G. I don't think that Pays is going to be good enough in the short term. I'm not sure what he's going to look like in the long term. I might drop Gen G into the A tier and push Sandbox up into the A tier. So I'm going to make a note of that again. And then for the S tier teams, I think that Homalife, T1, and Dom1 are all obviously S tier teams. I'm not gonna punish Homalife in the rankings because they lost a match to Sandbox, because I have a high opinion of Sandbox. So when we look back at this, I don't think it's going to be that egregious of a loss. Then in week 1, let's talk about the matches that we've seen so far, and then we're going to do the LEC tier list. So far, we have G2 and Vitality as the top 2 teams. They're both 3-0. Koi and Mad Lions are both 2-1. XL, Fnatic, SK Gaming, Team BDS, Team Heretics, and Astralis. Most of those teams are 1-2. Astralis is 0-3. I got a lot of pushback on my rankings for some of these teams. I think that it played out kind of how I expected. I wasn't surprised by much in week 1. Dajor looked bad. So if I'm just looking at it from a individual team perspective, I think Astralis has looked pretty bad. Their drafts have been pretty bad. That match against Team Heretics, I don't know why you would take Jonghoon and put him on Ashe support 2 out of your 3 games. That's not how I would be using a player like that. Let's just go by each day. So G2 beat XL. G2, very good team. They're playing at a very high level. Yike is obviously a solid jungler and can carry. I was right about this, and like I mentioned in one of my other videos, I think it was pretty telegraphed what they were going to do with Yike, because we knew what his champion pool was on his previous teams. He plays carry style junglers, and that's how G2 is going to play around him. Caps is one of the most flexible mid laners in the world. He played Zac mid today. That was pretty cool. I have a lot of faith in G2 and Dylan Falco to be able to build a roster and also play around it correctly. We saw Karma top today. They're not afraid to push the boundaries of what's acceptable to draft in any meta. And I think that's a huge advantage, because so many of these teams are only allowing themselves to play certain champions that other teams are playing because they don't want to look silly if it doesn't work out. G2 doesn't care. If Caps went out there, played Zac mid, and got slapped, and he thought in his next match it's a good Zac spot, he's going to pick Zac again. He doesn't care as much what other people think. And that's a huge plus for a team. Then we had Koi against BDS. Koi's supposed to win that match, obviously. Like I said before, Astralis against Team Heretics. I think that was a pretty bad loss for Astralis. They had chances to win that match. Pretty disappointing in general. Might just have some problems with coaching and drafting. And yeah, you hate to see that. Dajor, I think, is just not a good player. They were saying that Ryze was one of his key picks throughout his career, and he played a Ryze game, I think, on day 2, and he looked horrible. So I don't know if it's just the moment's getting to him or what, but that was terrible. It was really just a terrible game overall. Mad Lions against SK, not surprising. Vitality against Fnatic, not surprising to me. I think Fnatic's overrated. I think Vitality is a better team. In the match against Fnatic, Vitality showed that they are able to communicate effectively, even though there's the huge language barrier. Language barriers get overplayed very much, I think, in League of Legends. We've been talking about it for years, that there's the common language of League of Legends that, if you're a jungler and you're playing in China, if you're in the same situation in Europe, you're going to know what to do. It's like, is the rest of your team going to be able to understand you when you try to tell them what to do? And obviously, based off of the voice comms that we've been able to hear, Bo is good enough at getting his point across especially in hectic Baron situations where he's telling the team, stop DPS, no, don't attack Baron. We need to deal with the other team to not give it away. And we saw that happen today in the Fnatic and Koi match, where Koi went for a Baron in a situation that was pretty risky. They got it down to like 1100 health, and I think Malrong smoked at that point in the game, and they lost Baron. They had like a 4,000 or 5,000 gold lead. They lose that fight. They lose Baron, they lose that fight, and they lose the entire game. It was a pathetic match today from Koi, and that's the concerning the concerning thing is that if you have a 4,000 or 5,000 gold lead, you can't be losing those games, especially the way that they drafted. Like they had Jhin as an AD carry, and I'm probably one of the biggest Jhin haters in the world. I couldn't believe that it was being used as support in Korea the other day, and I just honestly don't understand why you would pick Jhin into Fnatic's team composition. They already had, I think, 2 tanks. He's most likely not going to be able to deal with those tanks. But I digress. Next day, we had BDS against SK. Don't really care. 2 bottom-level teams. Mad Lions against Astralis. That's the one that Dazor looked horrible in. Vitality against Team Heretics. Team Heretics is bad. Koi against XL. Koi had a good match against XL. XL had a really tough first 2 games. Going up against G2 and Koi is not very fun. G2 slapped Fnatic. Not surprising. Fnatic's not good. SK Gaming against Team Heretics. This is what I'm talking about. Team Heretics was very overrated going into this. I think people wanted Team Heretics to be good. They're not. They're a bottom level team. XL, this match looked very sketchy for almost the entire game. They were continuously losing fights, but they were getting objectives, getting tower advantages, had an economy lead. And that's another way to win League of Legends. Some people will say they lost their first 2 games, then they weren't convincing against BDS, but at the end of the day, you get paid to win, and they won the game. I think that it'll be a good opportunity to bet on them going into week 2, up against Mad Lions, up against Fnatic, and then Astralis. I think that they can take a game off of Mad Lions or Fnatic. You'd probably want to bet them in both of those situations. If they end up losing both of those games, then you'll definitely want to take them against Astralis because their line should be depressed on the sports books. G2 against Astralis. G2 obviously much better than Astralis. Fnatic against Koi. Like I was saying, Koi has to be able to win that match. They were up 4,000 or 5,000 gold. Kind of sad there. And then Vitality beat Mad Lions pretty convincingly. So in terms of my tier list, I think that I'm going to have to move Astralis down. I like the talent of some of these players, but maybe it's just you need to wait until they get onto a different team, which is pretty sad considering it's like the first week. But it's just not looking good for them. I think I had them as a C level team. They have to get dropped down to D. So for SK Gaming, yeah, they're bad. BDS, yeah, they're bad. Team Heretics is probably the most. It's not the most annoying team to me. I think Fnatic is the most annoying team, but I hate all of the narratives around Team Heretics. It's so stupid, and it shows not how little the broadcasters understand. It's just they try to feed us these garbage narratives that don't exist. It's not reality. So I'm just going to read my note that I made for this team. So I think that they're bad, and I think that they're old. I don't think that teams respect Eevee, which is proven by giving away K'Sante consistently. Teams are basically saying, you can give him maybe the most broken champion in the game. Doesn't matter. We have a counter pick for it. He's not going to hurt us enough. He ended up doing okay in that first game against Astralis, but overall, most top laners are not afraid of Ebbie, and they shouldn't be. Also, the broadcast is obviously inept and pushing narratives. During the Jankos interview, they talk about teaching the young players, and now we're going to play a game. First, how old is Ruby? Write down on a piece of paper, how old do you think Ruby is? Do you think he's over, under 22 and a half? It's funny. He's actually older than 22 and a half, which I think is a crazy... I think calling him young is just crazy at that point because most players in League of Legends, when they're 25, they're considered an older player. But they were just continuously talking about... Jankos talking to the young players, Ebbie and Jankos both like 28 years old. Then they were saying, Jack Spectra, Mersa, and Ruby, much younger players. Like how are you able to, communicate with the younger players and stuff like that. And he was talking about it. And I think that he honestly just like had to answer the question, but he probably understands that his team isn't very young. If you want that put into perspective, on the second day, Team Heretics played Vitality. Ruby is a 25-year-old journeyman who has gone through multiple regions. Very cool. Good for you. You know who else is a mid laner in the LEC that has played in multiple regions, but is actually good? Is Perkz. And guess who's older? Perkz or Ruby? If you guessed that Ruby is older, you're correct. So we have Perkz, who is 24, and Ruby, who is 25. Who would you rather have on your roster? Perkz, the 24-year-old, who has gone far at Worlds, has played in multiple regions, has been a part of very good organizations, has been the best player on his team at multiple points during his career, understands the game incredibly well. Who'd you rather have, Perkz or Ruby? Would you rather have the young Perkz or the young Ruby? Obviously, you'd rather have Perkz. It's not even a question. And those are the little things. I know it's a very little thing, and maybe I'm just getting annoyed for like a silly reason, but I just don't like it because it distorts the perception of the fans, and then you have all the fans spewing the same garbage that the broadcasters do, and they feel justified in saying it because the broadcaster said it, and they must know what they're talking about, right? No, their job is not to know what they're talking about. Their job is to just talk and keep people interested while they're setting up the stage for the next game. And overall, I think that the broadcast, you can expect good and bad from the different people that are talking. I think the guy's name is Christy Frierson. He tries really hard, and it seems like he knows what he's talking about, and he's applying real information, and sometimes he pushes back against what people are saying, and it's kind of cringe a lot of the time when he's talking, and I hate using the word cringe, but there's just something about him that is not very easy to watch. So like I understand why people want to see somebody like Goldborg, who is easier to listen to and stuff like that, but half the stuff that he says is ridiculous and wrong, and I hate that happens, because I think that the other guy, I think it's Christy Frierson, obviously knows much more than Goldborg does about professional League of Legends. It's just that Goldborg comes across better and is more emphatic and emotive and is just a little more interesting to listen to for most people. Shox does a good job. Laura does a good job. Both of them kind of say some things that are bizarre and not true, but at the same time, they do a good job advancing narratives that are actually real for the most part. Except for the whole young thing, and a lot of that is probably at the directive of like the producers and stuff like that. So I don't know who should really get all the blame for this, but somebody in the LEC is just not doing their job when they're pushing narratives like Team Heretics and the quote unquote young players. Yeah, I had to get that off my chest. Okay, so going back to the age narrative, let's talk about Jack Spectra, right? So Jack Spectra is a quote unquote young AD carry, right? He must be, maybe the first or second youngest player in the region as an AD carry, right? Wrong. Exakick is younger, and I don't know much about Exakick, but Exakick is also a rookie, and they're a younger rookie. So already there you have somebody who is much younger, much more quote-unquote inexperienced. They must be, because they're younger. That's not how it really works. But still, they're on a level playing field. Then I'm gonna save one of them for last. But then we have Comp. Comp is arguably the best AD carry, and he's 22. So who would you rather have? Comp, who is younger than Jack Spectra, or Jack Spectra? Who would you rather have? You would obviously rather have Comp. Patrick or Jack Spectra? Patrick, 23 years old. Jack Spectra, right about 23 years old. And, Patrick might be turning 24 soon, I don't know, but they're roughly the same age. I'll take Patrick 10 times out of 10. Then you have players who are slightly older. You have Neon and Han Sama, two proven AD carries in the LEC. Who would you rather have? Neon and Han Sama or Jack Spectra? Obviously, you'd rather have Neon and Han Sama. So, everybody wants to give credit to Peter Dunn for being able to put together rosters, and they think, oh, Peter Dunn is there. He must know what he's doing. This must be a good roster. Well, guess what? It's not. And it's not going to get better. This team is bad. They're very bad. So I'm going to have to downgrade this team. Mersa is young. Mersa's like 21. But what I was going to say about AD carry, guess who is I think over 2 years younger than Jack Spectra. And I'll give you some hints. It's a player who has won a championship in the LEC. That's pretty good, right? You want that kind of player on your team. It's also a player who's been in the league for 4 years. That's good. Means he has a lot of experience. He must really know what he's doing for the most part. Fans probably love this guy. He's probably never been widely criticized by everyone in the region for his play style and stuff like that. Well, guess what? That 21-year-old is Carzzy. Who would you rather have, Carzzy or Jack Spectra? Carzzy, who is 21 years old. I don't even think he's 21 yet. I think he's turning 21 like this week. He has like 3 or 4 years of experience, has won championships, plays hyper aggressive, and understands the game. And he's just a risk taker. And that's what people don't like, is that he takes risks. Like, that's insane to me. Going out and picking up a player like Jack Spectra, in what world is Jack Spectra ever going to be much better than Carzzy? They had this whole bit about, Jack Spectra, are you going to be a top 380 carry by the end of the year? And of course he's going to say yes, that he's going to be. And even if he is, cool, good for him. It's very unlikely considering he's on Team Heretics, and it's also very unlikely considering, if he was this good of an AD carry, he would have been on a professional team at the highest level at this point. It's just a fact. Like, people might say, well, his spot got stolen by 1 or 2 people. If he was undeniably good, like Bo is, for example, he would find a team. Somebody would get him onto their LEC roster. And that's not a shot at Jack Spectra. It's a shot at people pushing these bizarre narratives and wanting certain players to get brought up from a regional league. Just because you want it to happen doesn't mean it should happen. And when it does happen, it's not always for the best. So there's that. Very, very frustrating listening to a lot of the narratives that are out there. So Heretics, we have Astralis. Astralis looks bad. They need to go much lower in the rankings. Right now, they're the 35th ranked team in the world. I have to drop them down pretty significantly. Then we have Fnatic. I honestly think that Fnatic should be 0-3 right now. Fnatic is just not very good. I think that we're seeing a lot of the problems with a team like Fnatic. They were very competitive with Vitality in that first game. They threw it away. I don't think that Fnatic is as bad as Astralis, Heretics, BDS, SK. There's definitely a clear distinction between those types of teams. But you see Fnatic against G2, they got completely dismantled. I think that Fnatic against a team like XL and Mad Lions, it's going to be very close. And in a best of 3, best of 5, I would prefer to have the higher upside of Mad Lions with their extremely variant playstyle, and XL with with players who I think are just of a better pedigree. And I know that's tough to hear because Wunder has been a very good player for a long time. Razork has been a good jungler for a decent amount of time. Humanoid is considered very good. I've never been a big fan of Humanoid. And then you have Reckless, who's a household name, and then Rux, who people really want to be successful, but hasn't looked great so far. He had some moments, I think, in that first game against Vitality, but overall, not truly a difference maker. And that's really what you want. I honestly think that if Fnatic had a player like Jonghoon as their support, I would not be able to keep them at like the C tier because I would have belief in Jonghoon. But with this roster, I'm just not sure how high they could realistically get. Mad Lions has looked good. But again, the desk just says crazy stuff. They said that Elyoya and Niski is the best mid-jungle duo. I think they were asking the question of Elyoya, and of course he's going to say, like, yeah, we're one of the best. But, like, Bo and Perks is obviously better. Yike and Caps is obviously better at this point. Malrong and Larson's obviously better at this point. And Razork and Humanoid, for everybody who wants to say Humanoid is like a legitimate mid laner and one of the best in the world, which is incorrect, but people want to say it, like, they're a good mid-jungle duo, but it's because of the jungler. Most mid-jungle duos are good, and the emphasis is on the mid laner and giving resources over to the mid laner. I think that Bo and Perks is probably going to end up being the best because they can go both ways. I think that G2 is obviously going to be in competition for that because it can go both ways as well. We haven't seen Yike do it as a supportive jungler yet, but I'm sure he has that ability. It's the easier style of League of Legends to play, and you have a player like Caps. The funny thing is that Caps is so good and so flexible. He might just be like, you pick the champions that allow you to be successful. I'll figure it out. I'll help the team out somehow. The guy is very good. It's pretty insane. XL, Odoamne, Xerxes, Vedio, Patrick, and Targamas. I was a little disappointed in XL this weekend. I think that they had opportunities to, really prove that they're going to be a solid team this split. And now there's a lot of pressure going into next week because you have a matchup against Mad Lions, Fnatic, and Astralis. I think they should go 2-1, if not 3-0. Like, that'd be cool if they went 3-0. You're probably going to drop one of those games. Hopefully not the third game against Astralis. That would be tragic. And again, I know that everybody has their teams that they want to support. I like XL. I think that Vetio, Patrick, and Targamas, 3 pretty good players, 3 relatively young players. Odoamne and Xerxes, a little bit older. Xerxes surprisingly young for how long he's been around. Odoamne is older. That's fine. If you have one player who can play weak side and is a solid player, you don't need every player on your team to be super young with upside. But they have 3 players that are pretty young with upside, or at least young enough to be like realistically within their prime for the next 3 years and have a couple of years under their belt of playing well. Then we have Koi. Koi is a good team. Shigenda has looked okay so far. I think that he looked pretty bad today against Fnatic. He's one of the reasons why they were. He's one of the reasons they unfortunately lost that match. Although most of the blame probably comes down to Malrong. I think that Shigenda was really exacerbating the problem in the mid game by putting himself into bad spots, and then the team as a whole was getting punished. G2, I might have to put G2 above Vitality, but I just believe so much in Bo, and I think that the Vitality G2 match next Monday is going to be amazing. I hope that it ends up going carry jungler against carry jungler, because that will be the best way to showcase that Bo is a better player than Yike. I don't know if we're going to get that kind of draft because Bo has already played, Sejuani and stuff like that, which is fine. Like if he's going to play that, then okay. It's just at the end of the day, when they're in these like high intensity matchups against very good teams, like if they were going to play internationally, you want him to have as many reps on carry champions as possible. Take the G2 idea of playing around your jungler with Yike and do the same thing with Bo. There's a lot to learn, I think, from Vitality. There's a lot for Vitality to learn from G2. And that's basically it. So obviously, I could see why people want to flip Vitality in G2. G2 does look very good right now. Photon's been a little better than I thought he was going to be. Yike's been a pretty pleasant surprise so far. Shigenda was good in the first 2 matches. Not as good in the third game. It's going to be an interesting split, I think, for the most part. It's funny. I was looking at the results, and if you look at the standings, you have G2 and Vitality at 3-0. They're both my A-tier teams. Koi and XL are my 2 B-tier teams. In this, it would be Koi and Mad Lions, just going off of the record. But obviously, the records don't tell the whole story. Then we have XL Fnatic. So it's Fnatic, SK, BDS, Heretics, Astralis, all those teams, with a losing record, including XL. I think it's clear that XL and Fnatic are not like the rest of those teams. SK, BDS, Heretics, Astralis, bad teams. They don't really have much upside, I don't think. It'd be very surprising. If one of those teams is going to turn it around, maybe it is SK. Certus, Exakik, Marcoon. They said some weird stuff about Irrelevant. Like, they think that he has the upside of being like a very good long-term top laner. I haven't really seen anything yet, and he's been around for, I guess, a decent amount of time. But that's a tough thing to kind of convince anybody of. But that's basically it. I ranted a couple of times there. But at the end of the day, I think, obviously a week from now, 2 weeks from now, we're going to have all 4 regions in play. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let me know what kind of content you want to see. I'm going to keep doing the Esports Center videos. I'm trying to map out a schedule where I can do a video for like each region once a week, and then a global tier list every week or maybe once a month, and then Esports Center clips and stuff like that. I also think it might make sense to do like one Esports Center per week with a lot of clips, that's probably the best way to go. And maybe I release that on one of the off days, just like reviewing the previous week. Maybe that's the way to go. I do like a review or a esports center review, and then the next day I could do like the upcoming week preview for like all the major regions, something like that. Just let me know if you have any ideas like that. It's helpful because, you know, making the video is a lot of fun. Thinking of ideas for videos is not as fun. But that's all I've got for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.